Hello? Can you hear me? Great. I have a question. Is there anyone who don't understand Polish? Okay, so I will talk in English then. So, hello everyone. My name is Jacob Kubryński, and today I'd like to share with you some of my experience related to building RESTful services. I'd like to talk about mistakes I've made. I'd like to talk about the consequences and the traps that are waiting for you if you are planning to create the RESTful web services. I don't want to talk about the basics, so I understand that you know what are the RESTful services, what are some formal constraints behind the REST services, and we will be talking about the more advanced stuff. So, few words about me. I'm a co-founder of the DevSkiller. We have created a platform which allows you to test candidates' coding skills before inviting them for a job interview. And we are doing this evaluation in target environment, which consists of frameworks, tools, and libraries that are used in your organization on a daily basis. So if you are using Spring, Hibernate, and Maven, we'll test candidate across knowledge of the Spring, Hibernate, and Maven. Also, I conduct trainings in mostly Spring and performance tuning at Bottega, and I'm a co-organizer of the Confitura conference. If there are any questions you would like to ask, please leave them until the end, when I will do my best to answer them. And the code is more what you would call guidelines than actual rules. Welcome abroad, the Black Pearl, Miss Turner. These words, originally by Capitan Hector Barbosa, were linked with RESTful services by Ben Hale from Pivotal team. And I think it's a brilliant idea. Why brilliant? Because REST is more about a set of practices, set of best practices, than actual rules, actual formal constraints. And REST is tricky, and for me, REST can be compared to Scrum. So Scrum is easy to understand, and it's really hard to master the Scrum. And it's similar with REST. It's easy to understand the REST, but it's hard to be good at REST. And as I said, because it's more about the practices than formal constraints. In fact, there are some formal constraints that have to be met in order to say that we are doing REST services. And just to describe these constraints. First, to have a REST services, we are talking only about client-server applications. Everyone knows what client-server means, so I will skip it. The next thing is stateless. And stateless in the context of RESTful is a buzzword. The same with caching. Caching, okay, it should be cacheable, but I will describe these two things, so stateless and cacheable, in details later. Next thing, we are talking about the uniform contract, so the uniform interface. And what does it mean? It means that I want to have all these blocks I'm using to consume or expose REST services to be reusable. So I will use HTTP, I will use JSON, I will use some particular methods to have the same blocks in different applications. And last but not least, we are talking about the layered systems. So what does it mean that system is layered? It means that it's not important if client is connected directly to the server, or there are a lot of things between client and server. So, for example, what can be between client and server? Load balancer, firewall, CDN, or some web accelerator, and so on. It has to be transparent to our application. So I have direct connection, okay, I'm adding a load balancer, and it should work out of the box the same as before changing my infrastructure. Okay. And probably most of you are familiar with Richardson maturity model. It's the maturity model of REST. At below, in the hell, we have the swarm of POCs. And the first question, if you know the answer, please raise your hand. I have some gifts to you. What means POCs? P-O-X. Anyone? P-O-X. No one? Great. You have won the best debugging tool in the world, so please come after the presentation. Yeah, it's plain old XML. So it's the swarm of plain old XML. So in fact, we are using the HTTP, but REST is just SOAP services. And now we are want to do REST services. So what is our direction? What's the correct direction? We are introducing some resources, some sets of collections, like users. And user resource is accessible through /users URL. If I want to get a particular user, I'm using /user /123, where 123 is a unique identifier of the user. And now I have resources. Still, I have all operations in a URL, so create, edit, cancel, delete, etc. But I have resources, so it's one good thing. So let's go one step further. I will remove all these verbs from URL, and I will replace them by using the HTTP verbs. So if I want to delete resources, I will use delete method. If I want to update resource, I will use the put method. If I want to create resource, I will use the post method. We'll talk about it later. And most of application I've seen, and most of the application on the internet are finishing on this level too. But there is still one more thing to do. So we can introduce the hypermedia. And hypermedia control is about building really loosely coupled application. I will cover this in details later. Okay, so first dilemma that's here is post versus put. When to use post, when to use put. And of course, post can be used to create new resources, while put can be used for updating existing resources. But also put can be used to create resources if ID of this resource is already known. So an example of that. Imagine that we have some web form, and this web form results in creating user. And unique identifier of this user is, for example, social security number. And if this social security number is filled by the user, yeah, I can create it by invoking put with this unique identifier. And what is the theoretical difference between post and put? Anyone knows? Yeah, and post is not idempotent. Yeah, exactly. You also win this. Cool things. Yeah. So put is idempotent, while post is not idempotent. So that's the main difference. And usually we are using put for updating existing resources. But in HTTP, there is a method called patch. And anyone is using patch in applications? No. Mostly we are not using patch because there is no out-of-the-box support for patch method. There is no out-of-the-box support in Spring, in Java Enterprise, in Node.js, etc., etc. But we can use, we can implement partial updates using some features that are already existing in Spring. And in JSON mapper. Probably you are using JSON mapper even if you are not doing it directly. But Spring MVC, for example, is using JSON mapper. So in JSON mapper, we can create something called reader for updating. So I have a Spring MVC method called update article, which is the patch method, and it has two parameters: article ID and request. It's just a HTTP server request. So I'm retrieving from repository current article. And I've injected object mapper, just regular JSON mapper. And I'm creating reader for updating the current article. And I'm reading values from the request. And in fact, I get the updated article. So new article with some fields overridden from this JSON comes in into my method. And now I can save it. It's great, especially for CRUD application, where there is no some fancy validation and other things. just updating the CRUD. And it can update POJO, it can update map and collection. And it's really easy to just implement some general method that will be available through all of the controllers in your application. Next thing, which is really, really tricky, is caching solution. Why it's tricky? Because there are some differences between different browsers. And if you don't specify any cache headers, so there is no cache headers at all, what will happen in an Internet Explorer? Yeah, it will cache it, because no headers, no cache headers means cache everything, okay? And be aware, because this caching in Internet Explorer is really aggressive. And I didn't know about it. We have in DevSkiller application that is written in AngularJS, backed by RESTful services. And we had a problem because after updating some code, build results were still the same. And problem was only in Internet Explorer. And it was our mistake because we have skipped the cache headers. Because I assumed that if there is no cache header, then the request won't be cached. And in Internet Explorer is not correct way of thinking. So what's the easiest solution for these caching problems? The easiest solution is to disable caching at all, but do it explicitly. Okay, don't rely on some behavior of different browsers. And how we can get this working in Spring? We just need to add web content interceptor and set cache seconds to 0. And that will result in adding the no cache, no store, and different headers to our requests. And that's great for the beginning. If your application is growing and now you need to cache some results, then it's no problem, because you can inject cache mappings to the web content interceptor and specify that for this URL, please cache it for 3,600 seconds. For this URL, use such caching and so on. And everything can be specified by URL mappers. Okay? There are a lot of cache headers. And probably you see that when you are getting some requests, there are some few different headers related to caching. And but there is only one header that is in fact working. So all this pragma cache and so on, it's just a legacy. There is only one header called cache control that controls caching in our browsers and our CDNs and web accelerators, etc., load balancers, etc., etc. And there are some few arguments that you have to put. And there is a trap, of course, here. Because if you will just copy-paste the value for this header from Stack Overflow, you are screwed. Why? Because there is public. And what does it mean that this is public? It means that this request can be cached everywhere. So it can be cached by some content delivery network, CDN. It can be cached by load balancer, on some proxy, etc. Okay? So there's problem. Okay, I have really cool authorization mechanisms in my application, but if I will put public here, so this will be public, then regarding this authentication, you will get this result. So for example, if it will be for, I don't know, transfer list for bank account, and it will be cached on CDN, then everyone else on the internet will see your bank account results. So not great. Maybe it's better to use private sometimes, okay? And there is maxH, which is, I think, obvious. S maxH is the same, but this is all these parameters starting from S are parameters for CDNs, so for something that is called shared cache. Okay, so not only for the browser, but also for load balancer, CDNs, proxies, etc. And there are two parameters called no cache and no store. And what's the difference? between these two values. So no cache works when you reload the page. So if there is no cache, you are hitting the reload button, so there will be new request to the server. Great. But if you will hit back in your browser, there will be no hit to the server. We'll use cache. Why? Because for that behavior, there is no store. So just to be sure that there will be no caching in browser, it's good to use both. So no cache, no store. It will work on all different browsers. Okay? And there is one more thing related to caching. Have you heard about something called entity tag? Anyone? Yeah. So what is the entity tag? Yeah, exactly. So we have something called e-tag, entity tag. So I'm doing a request to the server, and I'm getting the saying, okay, so give me this user. And server is giving me user, but also is sending me a unique identifier of this particular version, this particular representation of this particular user, okay? And then in the next request to the server, I will add new header. Give me user with that ID only if none match this unique identifier. And server will check, okay, it's exactly the same version that you have already, so not modified. And if there will be any modification, then I will get, okay, so you have the older version or different version, so please, here you have your new version. 200 okay, okay? And in Spring there is something called shallow e-tag header filter. And it's implementing this entity tag stuff, but how it works. It generates the whole response, so the server is processing your requests, all your controllers, services, some external web services, databases, and so on. And after finishing all response, server will serialize your response body, generate the MD5 checksum for that, and then compares it to the e-tag that you've requested. And it said, okay, that's the same, so not modified. But we have processed all the requests, so it makes no sense. However, if you are, for example, using the Hibernate, then we often use the optimistic locking, yeah? So I can create this entity tag based on, for example, entity class name, entity ID, which is unique, of course, for the class, and version. If I will concatenate this string, then it's unique, okay? And I can check, for example, okay, user is asking for the same version I have already, so I won't process all transformations, mappings, external, I don't know, databases or services just to create some fancy DTO. I will return 304, okay? So that's how we can also use the e-tag to increase performance of our applications. Next thing, which is really good to performance reasons, compression. Compression reduces response dramatically, size. And what I mean by dramatically, it's the response usually with compression is about 10 times smaller than the request without compression. So of course it's better to send 10 kilobytes than 100 kilobytes. Yeah, it's better to send 100 kilobytes than 1 megabyte, and so on. So it's good to turn on compression, especially that it's really easy. Because to turn on compression, for example, in Tomcat, you just need to extend the Tomcat connector and say compression on with minimum size and no compression for user agents, and compress only types like text HTML and text XML. And that's all. And it will automatically work. Okay? So next thing is the HATEOAS. It's the hypermedia as the engine of application state. And it's, as I said before, it's about building really loosely coupled applications. So HATEOAS in REST is similar to what we used to, for example, on some informational portals like, I don't know, bbc.com, wp.pl, etc. We are not getting list of articles with the article ID, and okay, now I need to enter this URL / add the article ID and it will work. I just have a hypermedia. I'm clicking and I'm going to the new location. And the same idea works in REST. So I'm asking, for example, for some customer, and I'm getting this name of this customer is Alice, some other information about this customer, but also I have links. I have link to the parent customer, so for example, the boss of Alice. I have a link to the current order. Okay? Without HATEOAS, I will get only the current order ID, and I will use the hard-coded string that order / order ID is the location of my order resource. And here, I have link just here. So I'm getting the proper link, and I'm retrieving the current ID. Okay? Why it's loosely coupled? Because if I will change orders to, I don't know, order packages or something like that, there is no change at all in client application. Because I don't have to change this URL, because this URL is dynamic. It's retrieved from the response. So response is self-descriptive, okay? And we are usually using HATEOAS, for example, for creating resources. If I'm creating a resource, then I have to return to one created, response status, but also location header with location of my newly created resource, okay? But how we can implement, how we can introduce HATEOAS into our application? Is it hard? No. There is, for example, in Spring, there is a project called Spring HATEOAS. You are just adding the dependency to your project, and there are two ways of introducing HATEOAS into our resources. First is that our DTOs or entities, depends on the size of your applications, should extend the resource support. The other way is to just wrap the entities or DTOs into the resource object. And then there is some fancy class called controller link builder, and we'll use it here. So I'm getting the I'm implementing the get method which returns the customer. And I have the customer ID, which is a path variable, and I'm retrieving the customer from the repository. Here is the parent ID, is the identifier of the boss of my customer, current order ID is in OID, and so on. And now I have some method called add. So customer add link to method on customer controller, and this is just the same method here with customer ID with self rel. Customer add link to method on customer controller get with rel parent. Customer add link to method on order controller, so it's different controller, method get OID with rel current order. And it will build all this stuff here, okay? It will be created and added to the response automatically by Spring. If I want to add location to response, no problem. Response entity created, so it means 201 created. Link to customer controller / ID to URI build. And it will add automatically the location header to my resources. And is it simple? I think yes. If I will change this method, no problem. Here will be refactoring, so IDEA will be, or Eclipse will automatically change all this stuff, and my links still will be correct, okay? And due to this uniform contract I've told before, we have some codes, status codes in HTTP. And Dana Danger has described it really briefly. So 200, it's cool. 300, ask the dude over there. 400, you fucked up. 500, we fucked up, okay? And that's really uniform. And when you are returning, for example, 400, so bad request, it's good to include detailed information. So not only HTTP status, but also some body for this response object. Because 400 bad requests, it can be everything, okay? Maybe incorrect serialization, maybe some data is missing, maybe some validation problems, etc. And if you will, for example, add to this status, HTTP status, some exception code, maybe some message, maybe some link to, I don't know, page or something else containing some detailed information about this, your customers or even different teams using your software in the same organization will be really happy, because in the other way, they would have to grab your logs and see what happens. And if they're your customer, probably your customers no access to your logs, and that could be a problem, okay? So please include detailed information to generic exceptions, because for not found, probably we'll live without detailed information. For 400 and 500, detailed information is really needed. What else is important with exceptions? Please hide stack traces. There are a lot of applications on the internet where you are getting, for example, the null pointer exception, and I know everything. Which server are you using? If you are using Spring or Java Enterprise and so on. And for some hacker or just for your competition, it could be really important information. If you will hide stack trace, then really nothing happens and you will be safe, okay? What else is really important in Spring MVC is that if you don't do some special things, then Spring will just forget every exception related to the framework problems. So if there will be some problem with serialization, with serializing request body, with finding proper mapping, there will be no exception in logs at all. If you want to see these exceptions, these are really important exceptions. You can believe me. You have to extend the response entity exception handler with your controller advice and override the handler exception internal method. And here is this is the only place in application where you can log some internal exceptions for Spring, like for example, no mapping had been found, or no way to serialize some particular, I don't know, the content type or something like that, okay? So that is important. Okay. If you want to just handle some application exceptions, there's no problem. You're just adding the exception handler annotation with the exception class and response status not found, and it will map all this stuff. Of course, you can create some generic handler resolving exceptions from some custom mappings from database, etc., etc. About the API versioning, please don't even think about including version in URL. Why? Because in REST, URI to the same resource has to be fixed between version, because we have to know that there is resource and representation of the resource, okay? Resource is the user, and this user, if it's, for example, me, I'm the same in the first version, second version, and third version, okay? So resource is the same. We are changing the representation of the resource. So it's the same, like, for example, you will have different URLs for XML and for JSON. Does it make sense? Probably no, but it's the same. The resource is the same, and only the representation is changing. So where do we set that I want to retrieve the JSON or I want to retrieve XML? In content type. So if I'm talking not about the resources, different resources, but only about the different representation of these resources, content type, so accept header, is the proper place to specify this. And I can specify that. First version is application vendor domain JSON. Okay, if someone accepts this, this content type, I will return this content type. But if someone accepts the application vendor domain v2 JSON, then I know that it's consuming the second version. Resource is still the same. URLs are still the same. I'm just returning different representation of the same resource, okay? Next thing, filtering and sorting. Of course, we know how to filter. Get, reviews, rating, sorting, etc. But for dynamic queries, it's easier to do post request than giant URL with all this filtering stuff and so on. But we are not able to use post to get data because it's REST. To get data, we have to use get method. So how can we solve this problem? We can create post for review searches. So I'm creating new search object. Brilliant, okay? What's more, if I've created some search, this search can be stored in, for example, some shared cache or replicated cache, etc. I can cache this query, and then I can just get next page without sending this whole query string one more time. I can just use searches 23, it's ID for the search, second page, okay? So I can try to use it to optimize my requests, not only to, you know, be happy that, yeah, now I'm using post, but I'm creating search object, not getting the element. Next thing is the documentation. Of course, developer loves writing documentation, yeah? So the problem with documentation is that it's valid for the moment when you have been writing this documentation. After 1 month, probably there were some changes in code, but there was no time to update documentation, etc. But there are tools called, like for example, Swagger. So it's creating the runnable documentation with examples, and it's basing on annotations in your code. So if I have annotations using JAX-RS or using Spring, I'm just adding some Swagger annotations, and it will create me such documentation. So I have controller with request mapping path, and there is some description of this controller. This is method on the same mapping post, which adds a new path to the store, etc. Also, here I have some descriptions of the parameters. So pet ID is required. It's the ID of pet that needs to be updated, name, status, etc. Response message 405, invalid input. Great. But also there is button try it out. So I can enter the pet ID, click try it out, and this documentation will invoke my REST service and shows me what data is retrieved. Okay, so it's really easy to implement, to integrate with such API when I can, you know, check just from the documentation how it's working, and if it's working as I assume it's working. Okay, next thing, this buzzword called stateless or not. Many people are thinking that stateless means that there is no session and nothing. Each request is totally independent, okay? But we've created such application that there were no session at all. Each request was totally independent, and it was great, except that password hashing was taking about 90% of the request processing time. So each request was about 200 milliseconds, was just to hash the password and check if password of the user matches, okay? And after that, the request was processed in 20 milliseconds. So maybe it's not the best idea. But if I want to use the stateless, if I want to use sessions, I have to replicate those sessions, okay? And then it's great. If I will hit to one server, it's great. If I will hit another, there is session which is replicated. Also, if I will use sessions, then I can use sticky session load balancing, okay? It also can be good because I can have some things, some results, some queries data cached on particular nodes. And it's cached on node number 1, but not on node number 2, okay? But what does it mean this application is stateless? For me, stateless means that there is no context information stored in session. I can have session, but without some informations like, for example, how many products in cart this user have, or something like that, okay? So I have session, but this session is stateless. It's something that is tricky, but in fact, it's really easy to use it in this case, okay? And if you will decide that you don't want to have any sessions because stateless is cool and there will be no stateful information at all, please remember that with default configuration in Spring you will have the session boom, because for each request Spring will create new session object. If you don't want to have few thousand session objects after 2 seconds of processing requests, then you have to set the session management and session creation policy to never. Because without this line, you will have each new session created for each request coming to your application. And now I'd like to talk a few minutes about security. Why? Because there is something called OWASP Top 10. There are the most important problems with security of our applications. And on the first place, there is SQL injection. But why? We are using Hibernate, so there is no SQL, so how can we inject something? Okay, there is number 1. XSS is number 3, CSRF and XE are also in top 10. Okay, so I use Hibernate, so I won't have SQL injection. Yeah, I have the HQL query, select P from product P, where P category plus product get result is. There is no SQL. So what will happen if I will set the category for something like that? Hibernate will translate it to such SQL query. And what's that? Yeah. So we are using Hibernate queries, but still we have SQL injection, okay? If it will be, for example, user list, I will get list of all users. So how to fix it? The same solution for as for JDBC. I'm using binded parameters. So here I have parameter, I'm setting parameter, etc. And how this question looks like now? It will be escaped. And probably there will be no result at all, because there is no category called or 1 equals 1, okay? Next, really important thing that you have to think about when doing REST services. It's called CSRF, so cross-site request forgery. So if we have API that allows us to transfer money from account 1233 to account 1234 with such amount using the GET method, probably it's not the best API. But assume that someone who is logged into your bank system is also using some, I don't know, Facebook application. If there will be such image on a Facebook, there you will never see this, because it can have, for example, 1 pixel for 1 pixel. But this transfer will be done. If we are using post, great, we can use post. Then you can, for example, get some page with such form. API, mybank.com, transfer, method is post, and three hidden fields, from, to, and amount. And submit, yeah, so I'm clicking, okay. For my browser, there is no difference if this request is coming from the first or the second tab, okay? So it's the same. Of course, there is difference in domain, which is invoking this request, but it requires to have, for example, the correct CORS headers. What I mean by the CORS, there is something called cross-origin request sharing. And this request has two parts. So at the beginning, we are getting the pre-flight request. Okay, so browser is sending the options, and from this origin with such headers for that host, etc. And if we are supporting the pre-flight CORS, then we should return something like this. Three headers. Access control allow origin www.domain.com, such methods and such headers. And it's great, but usually when you are using CORS, you are just copy-pasting the answer from Stack Overflow, and on allow origin there is star. So we are accepting everyone, okay? And then if we are talking about bank account, this will work. If there will be only particular domains that are safe for you, then this will result in exception, okay? Often we are thinking that, but I'm using the fancy new web server with great framework. I don't have to care about the security. So now I will show you something that works on the newest Wildfly with newest REST Easy, okay? I can have a method for adding comments, okay? And this method is getting the XML. So I'm sending comment with text, yeah, I like it. We know that in XML there is something called entities. So now I'm defining entity called A with the text, yeah, I like it. And here in the text, I have a reference to the entity, okay? It's exactly the same for your web server. So let's move on. Now my entity A will be not the yeah, I like it, but it will be system etc passwd. And what will happen? This will be stored in our database. So now I can enter this page, see all added comments, and I will get everything that is inside the etc passwd. Also, I can return configuration of my application server, get some, I don't know, passwords to databases, URLs, and so and etc. Okay. There is also one more thing that I can do. So I have entity A with ABCD, etc. Entity B, which is entity A plus entity A plus entity A plus entity A. And entity C is entity B plus entity B plus entity B, okay? If I will send something like this to my web server, then letter H will consume about 3.7 gigabytes of RAM to process this request. If I will go to letter K, it will be 3.7 terabytes of RAM. And if we will go through letter N, it will be 3.5 petabytes of RAM. Okay? So it will result in server crash. This XML will have about a few kilobytes of memory. So the key takeaway for you is that we need to go deeper, okay? The working Hello World application is not enough to start working with some technologies, some servers in productional environment. Because these things I show you at the end with these XML files, if you will use the newest Wildfly with default configuration, then you will get such problems, okay? So we have to go deeper and check across all these things. The same with sessions. We are using the New Relic, so we saw that, okay, why we have 10,000s of new sessions for each new garbage collection. That's something that's strange, okay? So please go deeper and check your solutions, your technologies, your tools across many different and maybe strange things, just to be safe and avoid all these traps. And thank you very much. If you have any question, probably we can take a few more minutes to... Any questions? No? Yeah.
What are your proposals for handling authentication and authorization for REST services?
Yeah, so it's the same like for normal applications. So you can use basic authentication and authorize using just Spring Security. And it's nothing different from the normal web application. And I think that using sessions just to handle this authentication on the client side is okay. And you can, of course, replicate this session through different servers using some, I don't know, EH cache or any other stuff. But also, you can use this sticky session and just implement some stuff on client side that if your server goes down and you are going to another server, just show the login screen one more time and ask user to provide a username and password to authenticate on the new server. And then use sticky session, and you don't have to replicate session. Just, you know, implement the unauthorized response on your applications. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about versioning. You said that never version different than accept header.
Yeah.
What about path parameters and actually the best practice presented by Google and other small companies that actually does it in the path parameters? And what about the usability? For example, if you perform get operation in the browser, you cannot specify header, so you will get some random version. And what about caching you mentioned? So Internet Explorer will actually return you random version because you do not know which is stored. And yeah, how do you explain it?
How often are you consuming REST services from the browser?
Every time I play with a new API.
Yeah, so
every day.
Then probably it's better to use Swagger, for example, or to use some REST client in plugin for Firefox or for Chrome, okay? So
sure.
I think that it's no problem that you have to add accept header. And the same...
For me not, but for many developers using some different technologies, not always the ones that properly handle headers, it's an additional entry point, yeah, so.
Okay, I don't think it's a problem, but if you are working with teams or developers that see that it's a problem, you can still use the URL. But remember that there is big difference between resource and the representation of the resource, okay? And here we are saying, okay, it's the same user, but there are different addresses to this user. So you can access this user using the URL v1, v2, v3, etc. But it's still the same user, okay? So I have to hardcode some URL in my application. Yeah. And I think that it's not the best idea.
It's no difference. Yeah, anyway,
accept header is the same as JSON or XML. If you are using accept header, and that's the purpose of using accept header.
What about caches? So a lot of proxies or browsers actually
okay.
Cache,
so how often do you change the version of your application?
Once a year.
Yeah. So the caching is problem for that?
Yeah, but I have two versions running in parallel.
Okay, so the problem will be if you will use the public caching on some CDNs, etc. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that will be a problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, there are. So the last question here.
Hi, do you know any alternatives for Swagger if you are using Scala?
In fact, Swagger is using Scala. and it's built on Scala. But we are using mostly Swagger. We are testing some other tools, but they were not as great. But I can try to Google for the names if you would like. So please come after the presentation, and I will try to answer. Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope we will see after on the after party.